As most of you probably know, Greg Epstein is the Humanist Chaplain at Harvard University, a position that was created back in the 70s. And Greg is I believe there's a second person ever to hold that position, right? Tom Farrick held it for 30 years beforehand. And there are a small handful of other chaplaincies, humanist chaplaincies, around the country at a handful of other schools. But the chaplaincy at Harvard is by far the best funded, and also happens to have money makes the world grow.
I don't hear that sentence
Greg.
very often.
See, you got to ask everybody.
Relative to what is really what you have to ask yourself.
The other chaplaincies.
Yes.
The best funded amongst the humanist chaplaincies. I'll actually, we'll get into more about the money later. But,
sure.
But anyway, Greg comes out of the tradition of humanistic Judaism, or at least that's part of where he comes out of. There's a much richer story there, but he definitely is interested in ministering to all of the godless, and he is the author of the New York Times bestseller book Good Without God, and it's a fantastic book, and I recommend it. Anyway, but I think that the chaplaincy program is fascinating, and it's a really different model, and it's a model that's a little bit controversial within student communities. So, A, because we're at Harvard, and B, because there's some controversy here, I was really eager to make sure we got Greg and got him here to talk about that. I have a whole bunch of questions, but if you guys have questions during our talk, since it's so short, just raise your hands. And if I don't get through all of my questions, that's absolutely fine.
AU is a good way to begin too.
So I guess to start off, what do you think the three most important things you do as humanist chaplain at Harvard are?
So this is an evolving question. You wrote this one to me, and I thought, wow, it really has changed from year to year. The nice thing about my job is that it's been a chance to really work very creatively, I think, and got here to campus, and the program of the Humanist Chaplaincy was Tom would sit in the office that's provided for him. It's a very small office. I still occupy it by Harvard. It's about 80 square foot, and he would wait there for students to come to him, which they occasionally did, and he would organize a monthly lecture. And that was his responsibilities those were his responsibilities towards the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard, which is one nonprofit organization, and another nonprofit organization, which is it's now called the Greater Boston Humanists. So we have a profusion of nonprofit organizations in the humanist and atheist world, as you know, and they all have to do something, right? But it's not always known what they should exactly do. And so it's been a chance for me to be creative, and I've often said it's, the three things I do are building, educating, nurturing a diverse community of humanists, atheists, agnostics, non-religious at Harvard and beyond. But what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Right. So this year has been a little different. We've had a little bit of staff beyond myself for the first time this year, and that has enabled us a little bit more wiggle room. And so I think what I've focused on is working with undergraduate and graduate students to achieve a couple of concrete goals. We worked very hard on the event the other night. We worked very hard with the grad students on a trip to New Orleans that we wanted to really make a very much a community building, service learning kind of experience, and to try to really build a community here that's going to be sustainable. And so that's been really important. The other thing that I've been doing is teaching and advising on more research this year. So John and I have been working on a tutorial, a 4-credit tutorial at Harvard Divinity School, where we're trying to look at what it means to be a professional leader in the humanist and secular world. And the curriculum is something it's evolving, and John and I have had great conversations where he makes me think about, well, next year we're really going to need to do this and that, and and it's been terrific, and we've got at least 3 students that are coming in to take that course next year. If we get a 4th, and a 4th in John's category, meaning John is a student, I don't know if you guys have been over this, but in the Masters of Divinity program at Harvard Divinity School, which is a sort of unique program there. It's a 3-year program. You get a degree that is considered an ordination degree. So it's a degree that normally clergy would do. And if we get a 4th person in that category to take the course, we have 3, between now and January, February, when the course launches, the course will become not just a tutorial like you and I are doing, but it will be put into the official Harvard course catalog, and anybody from Harvard at that point will be able to take it. Business school students, law school, undergrads, whatever. And I think we would plan at that point on doing quite a bit of marketing of the course and really encouraging people from all walks of school to come in and join us for it. And I've been working with a lot of other grad students on very humanism-related research as well. Somebody that you guys should meet at some point, a guy named James Croft, who is a doctoral student at the Ed School, studying with a guy named Howard Gardner, multiple intelligences, sort of famous professor. James is really studying the sort of the educational philosophy of humanism, and that's what he's doing as his dissertation. Sort of and that's a really complicated way of saying how would humanists and secularists want to educate people about humanism and secularism, and he's really advancing the theory of all that. And then finally, I do really love the weddings and the funerals and the baby naming ceremonies and that sort of thing that I do, and it continues to be the kind of work that I do where even beyond just those, I'll sit down with a student who will come to my office hours and say, look, I don't believe there's a God, I don't believe there's a supernatural anything, but I also am not sure if I believe that there's a reason for me to be doing anything that I'm doing. I'm not sure if I believe that there's a good reason to get out of bed. And if there's somebody who hasn't or doesn't get a little depressed and a little bit hopeless feeling between the ages of, 17, 18, and 25, 26, have some period of their life where they, question why it is they're doing what they're doing. I've never met such a person. And I'm one of the resources on campus that's available to those people. I'm not here to solve all of their problems. I'm certainly not capable of solving all of their problems. But as we've seen with Cornell recently and other campuses, you can never have too many resources. You can never have too many places where someone can go for that kind of conversation. And the conversation that I've been able to have a lot this year is from a secular perspective, from a humanist perspective. As you begin to think critically and skeptically about all sorts of things, gods, magic, miracles, everything happens for a reason. No, it doesn't. Thank you very much. Where do you draw the line? Where do you then reconstruct a set of beliefs that says we have all kinds of natural reasons, all kinds of relative but still very important reasons for caring about ourselves, caring about one another, caring about the world. And I'm not the final authority on any of the issues that would be discussed in that setting, but it's nonetheless a very important conversation to me.
Okay. So I know that you like to get into the philosophical angle of all this and how it affects people's lives, and I kind of tend to like to get into how to pay for everything.
Sure.
Because well, let's face it, if you were not getting paid to do this, you would not be able to do it because you need to work to feed yourself, right? And that's true of me too. And I'm curious, and I don't be careful about how I say this. Like, 80 square feet is not a lot of space, and I've been to your office in Memorial Church, and it's and I'm curious how the funding for your position compares to the other chaplaincies at Harvard. I think there's 36 of them.
Sure. Have you guys have spent time at this conference going over budgets and whatever? I mean, SSA's budget has been laid out on the table and chopped up and diced rhetorically in every way, I assume. Is that right?
No.
No.
But we talked about.
So what's your budget?
It's about $290,000 this year.
Okay. Wow. Congratulations.
Thanks.
That's built from scratch. I mean, it really is.
Took 10 years.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. When I first took over my position, my annual budget was shocking, startling. I mean, get ready to experience the large S. $28,000 a year. So.
Not including salary, right? Or is
No.
that salary everything?
That's everything. That is everything. That was the entire budget of the organization. All right, it was about $28,000. That was to pay my full-time salary. That was.
He lives in Boston, by the way. It turns out rent is slightly more expensive here than in
He
Columbus,
lives
Ohio.
in Cambridge, which is even
Oh,
more
true story.
expensive
True
than that.
story.
Yeah.
Lives in the Boston metro area.
Yep.
Right.
So that was to cover my entire salary. That was to cover any program that we might want to run, anything. And when I said, well, we need more funding than that, my board said, great, good idea. And so one thing that I would suggest is that in this career field, and in this sort of movement in general, if you guys are comfortable calling it a movement, I use the word movement for humanism, secularism, etc., but other people are not as comfortable with that.
I'm fine.
And that's fine. I mean, call it whatever you want. That's a word I use. But in this movement, you have to be willing to take a risk if you're going to make any kind of advance whatsoever, because we are starting from a place that is so, a starting point that is so far behind anything that we might reasonably understand to be our competition. We are, we're so tiny.
So like, how many staff do the other chaplaincies have?
So, all right, I would just say Harvard Hillel, for example, which is not even the only professional chaplaincy on campus here to deal with the Jewish community, because there's also Chabad House, right? Which, when I say Chabad House, implies that there's an entire house with a family that run the house, and they're well-staffed, well-equipped too. They put on dinners for hundreds of people at a time, buy people hundreds of dinners at a time. That's their whole thing. On Friday night, you can go to Chabad House. One time a year, they do a dinner for 1,000 people, just on them. Other times of the year, several hundred. But then that's separate from Harvard Hillel, which in itself has a higher annual budget and more assets in total than the American Humanist Association. Okay?
And it's only serving Harvard.
It's serving
And it's
Harvard.
not the only game at Harvard.
Right, exactly.
For the Jewish community.
For the Jewish community. Does that put things in perspective a little bit?
What is their budget?
It's depending on the year, depending on the tax return. It's between $2 and $3.5 million a year, and then they've got about $8 million of assets because they've got a very large, beautiful building a few blocks from here.
And what's yours?
It's really changed each year. This past year, it was about 150,000. And
Speedy advance. Congratulations.
We're
up from 28.
Yeah.
Up from 28, and we're hoping. Thank you. And we're hoping that we can manage somewhere around $250,000 this coming year. We would like to get to that level, and we're working hard at it. And we're not afraid to say that we're working very hard to grow. And I think it's a responsibility that we have to grow, because in my mind, if you took the model that the humanist and secular community is currently organized around, and you offered that model to any religious institution with which we might want to compete, the model would ruin them. The model would be, we'll have a centralized organization in one place, right? Say the Vatican, right? And we won't bother with these local parishes, right? We won't bother with anything. There doesn't need to be an impressive cathedral in any given city. There don't need to be leaders mobilizing people to do soup kitchens or whatever it is in any given city. That we can have our one central spot, and that can be well funded and gilded. Not that, I mean, obviously the analogy is not that your new office in Columbus is gilded, right? I mean, it's almost an insult. I mean, actually, I wish it were, you know. But anyhow, I think the model that we need strong national central organizations to provide leadership, to provide a beacon, to provide
support for locals.
Support.
In my mind, that's what SSA
well, yeah,
about.
I mean, and that's right, and that's what national umbrella organizations often do, is they provide support, financial and other support for local groups. I've looked around. I mean, I'll go around, I'll meet with folks, you know, and say, well, I know that you're supporting national initiatives, so, you know, I just thought you might, and I feel like we're doing some things that have some national implications here at Harvard.
You are.
But no, I mean, the message that I get very often is that, you know, it's very nice, but you're local, and I'm not connected to your local, so I have nothing for you. And so the vast majority of our support at this point comes from people who are somehow tied to our community locally. They may be a Harvard alum, they may be just local here, or they may have some other special connection to our organization.
Sticking with the idea of, you know, wanting to have strong local groups, and earlier you talked about how, you know, one of the big things that the chaplaincy does is it helps the Harvard Secular Society and the graduate group. What can you do to help, and what can, you know, our students do if they're interested in bringing a chaplaincy to their campus? I know that, you know, the Harvard chaplaincy started off with an endowment, and yeah.
I would just like to add
I feel like I recognize you. Tell me your name.
Paul.
Paul, where are you from? Are you
Virginia?
Oh, okay, no, maybe not. All right, yeah. All right, sorry.
I just wanted to add something to that. Are chaplaincies typical at public schools, public universities?
So no, this is. I mean, right. If you're at a public school, the chances I don't look to me to be particularly high to have an official chaplain at your school. But you know that often doesn't necessarily mean much. I mean,
they happen, and even if there's not somebody who's an official chaplain per se or getting paid within the university,
right.
I know that at Ohio State there's a interfaith council, and the university lets sort of like local religious bodies nominate people to that, and the idea is that those people will get to know the student body and can, you know, minister to the people that already, you know, consider themselves Catholic, consider themselves Jewish. So even if they're not quite as formally constructed as they are at Harvard, and at Ohio State there's no church, and they meet in this little tiny room, but whatever, and they don't even get parking passes, and it's a much smaller affair. There are still people that get paid to essentially be off-campus leadership to the religious communities on campus, and just last month we had the president of the Humanist community of Central Ohio got recognized as the Humanist chaplain at Columbus, at Ohio State. It just happened, actually, not even last month, last week.
All right, so then,
but it's the waters are different. That's true, but I think in many
stand
cases
corrected though about the Ohio. I mean, because you know, I was under the impression that the difference was you're not going to get the title of chaplain at that university. You know, which again is a fairly small distinction. Is just, you know, which isn't even accurate apparently anymore. Because you know the university that you're sitting at isn't going to provide you any support or funding or whatever. They may give you a small office. And so, I mean, you know, Harvard does not fund us at all. And so, you know, what you do, you know, wherever you are, whether it be a campus like this one or public school, what a group can do, a campus or student group can do, is get to know a local humanist group or secular group in the area that has someone that you know, working for it or with it, and there are very few examples of people who work professionally with such organizations, who lead them or facilitate them professionally. So you know, it would be a professional, or it could be just somebody working at that organization that seems to have the skills and training required to advise, facilitate campus student work, and that person could be affiliated with the university. But again, I mean, my feeling is, why limit ourselves to the kind of structure where we don't have any permanence and we don't have people who are dedicating their careers, their lives to advancing our movement. I mean, if August and Liz and others, Debbie and were volunteering their time, I would suggest that we would be able to have less impact, because you simply aren't able to put in the amount of time, and the more time you put in over the years, the better you get and the more results you get, right? The whole idea of 10,000 hours of practice at any kind of job, right? That's the point where you actually become able to do your best work. It takes a long time to get to 10,000 hours as a volunteer.
Yeah. So are there, I guess, would you recommend, like, if somebody's like excited about becoming a humanist chaplain, like, should they come to Harvard and get an MDiv degree, or like should they? Or what do you think?
Well, I would say I would love to study with you. If you are interested in this kind of work, the sort of doing professional work in this field, and you really want to give your career to it. First of all, again, it's not a path that is without risk. It is definitely a challenge, and if you want something safe and something simple and easy, and sort of you punch in, you punch out, this is not for you. This is not the life for you. But if you want something exciting, something creative, something where you come in and when you leave, if you've done your job, things are very different than they were when you came in. Things that the landscape will be different. Culturally, there may be differences in our culture. There may be differences in the way campuses and society, and our entire society sort of operates because of your leadership. I think that there are places out there available for some of the students that we have, that you can really live that kind of life, have that kind of career. And I think that what we're trying to do is establish a program at Harvard Divinity School where those who are really dedicated to starting from the beginning of their career and giving this an entire career, where they work on these issues and in this movement for a long time and make a big difference, that this would be an ideal setting for people to do that in. There is also already something called the Humanist Institute, where you can go for a number of weekends over the course of a few years, and maybe a week or two intensively. I'm not sure exactly. I didn't do the Humanist Institute, but anyway, several sort of sessions intensively. There are places like that that you can go, but there is not a place at this point, other than what we're trying to create, where you can come in, 3 years later you check out, and you've had intensive training that gets you ready for an influential career.
And there's certainly not yet like a job waiting for you, like just ready to hire you. So it's certainly something that it sounds like students would need to be very entrepreneurially minded.
Yes.
In kind of a
Yes.
public sector interpretation of that sort of word.
Right, exactly. At this point, I'm looking for students who admire entrepreneurs, who think about, if they were not going to go into this field, they would go into business, or they would go into film, or they would go into some other sort of social field where they would say, I want to make a big difference, I want to get started, I want to do something where I don't mind taking a few risks, because I want to see things differently when I finish than when I started.
Yeah. So I once had a member of a group, I don't even know if it's still around or not, called the Unitarian Universalist Infidels, say something along the lines to me that the problem isn't gods and spirits. There's no God that's ever stolen from a parishioner or molested a child. The problem is clergy. It takes clergy to do those horrible things. And do you think that there's a danger in using the term chaplaincy, because it has this historical baggage of kind of setting aside the clergy as different from the laity? And how do you, I know you struggle with that, and obviously you think it's worth it, but
sure.
how do you bring people along?
There may be a danger. I leave that for others to judge. I think that anybody in my position who were to do anything like that.
Well, and I don't mean
right?
to suggest that.
But no,
that
but I mean,
most
but
churches
there,
do.
right, but I would say that, I mean, first of all, it's an interesting question because, right, the Unitarian Universalist infidels, right, so this is somebody, I don't know the person, but they're coming from a tradition where Unitarian Universalists are structured around churches and congregations and ministers and professional leadership. And actually, their movement, they have 110,000, or no, they have 1,100 churches or congregations, and they've got about 275,000 members, something like that. So that's a movement that where we would want to get to that point, right?
Sure.
So there are logistics. Anyway, I would just say that it may be a problem in the sense that I know that some people look at my title or the way that my job is structured, and they're not comfortable with it. And it's not, I can offer them reasons, but if you choose to not like it, I mean, that I understand. I mean, I suppose, it's a matter of individual choice, but I would suggest that we I mean, I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about this question in the sense that it's still tough for me too. This idea that that I work with people, from a very sort of, let's try to look at what best practices are for working with people to help them to have a sense of community, to help them to have a sense of what their beliefs are and are not, to help them to have a sense of what times in their life are meaningful to them and are not. The structure can at times be somewhat similar to what other liberal clergy will do. But if that gets identified in people's minds with the worst sort of sins of people, who have somewhat analogous roles, I'd be curious what your answer is to that. I mean, really, I don't know that I have a great answer at this point for what do we do, if the title is, I don't require anybody to call me chaplain, I couldn't care less. I don't require anybody to call me rabbi or minister or anything like that. But I just wonder, what are your thoughts on it?
Chris?
Oh, I don't have an answer to that, but I do have a question that's at least related to the last question that August asked.
Yeah.
So you spoke at the Interfaith Youth Corps Conference last fall, and you were on a panel with Sky Jethani, who writes for Christianity Today. I didn't really get to hear the panel because I was running around with an earpiece, but I read afterwards he wrote about you and wrote about how this idea of humanist chaplain was brand new to him, and that would be someone that he would be interested in working with and collaborating with. So I guess my question is, how have you found that using like traditional religious language or structure has, what kind of impact has that had on the kinds of collaboration you've been able to have with the other religious chaplains here on campus, and other leaders in religious communities? Yeah, I mean,
there's I think a very constructive dialogue going on where people can identify a position like this. The word chaplain started out as a Christian word. It was a Christian term, but I make the point, so did the word doctor. Right? The first doctors were doctors of theology. But anyhow, there were Christian chaplains, then there were Jewish chaplains, now there are Muslim chaplains, Buddhist, Hindu, etc. I went to Syracuse recently to speak, and they've got a new pagan chaplain. And I had an interesting conversation with her. And so it's a position that people know. It's something where this is an official go-to place, a representative of a community, where it's a place where you can find, by finding the chaplain, you can also find members of a community to engage with. And yeah, I've had really constructive conversations with religious chaplaincy is where people have very often told me something along the lines of, "Wow, I really had no idea about you guys. I thought you were all just anti-religious. I thought that you weren't going to be willing to work with me, but I've found that I can really identify with so much of what you stand for. I've found that I want to work with you. I want my students to get to know your students, and I just have a much better impression of what humanism and secularism is. And I think that it's just because people tend to have a negative impression of what they're not familiar with. Ibu Patel, who Chris, I guess, do you work for him at this point, or is he somebody that sort of supervises some of your work?
He supervises some of my work.
Yeah.
I'm contracted.
Right. But anyway, so I mean, as Ibu points out, he does a lot of work with secularists and humanists, but there's often not an address or a destination that he can send people to, and that's one of the great things that SSA does, is it creates an address, a destination, and that's exactly the kind of work that we're doing. We're here on the ground to try to make that address, a more prominent address, a more a home that people can really work out of, and it's very similar to what you guys are doing. Yeah.
All right. Well, real fast.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
So, go ahead.
You're talking a lot about community and building community. So what have you done on the Harvard campus to actually build communities?
Yeah. Well, we've built community in some of the ways that you were you at the event that we did Friday night. I think we've worked on putting together concrete events that I think give people a sense of what humanism and secularism can be through sort of bringing in notable people like the Mythbusters and Joss Whedon, whatever, and then getting our students, empowering our students to really work very hard to set up those events, and through that building a community where people get together and they hang out and they become each other's best friends in the dorms, and they do service together, and that's sort of some of the very same kind of things that you probably do in secular groups. But what I would say is that it might be rare for a campus group that doesn't have this kind of professional presence to have every single year an event at the end of the year that 800 to 1,000 people attend, to host conferences almost every single year, to do a community service trip every single year, to have alumni who are out doing really wonderful, important things in the world be in touch with undergraduate and graduate students, to have faculty that regularly gets together with these are the kinds of things that SSA groups can do, but we are trying to do more and more and more of them, and really build a critical mass here. And I think that it can require, or at least it can be very important to have professional presence to bring all that together. I'm like the coach of the team, that we wouldn't ask a championship basketball or baseball team or whatever on campus to coach itself. Players don't remember all of the best practices from year to year. They don't have the ability to sort of go from one thing to the next without sort of getting caught up in their studies at some point. So I'm here to make sure that from year to year things stay together, they grow every single year. People build better and better relationships, and we'll see where it goes in 5-10 years.
I see the hands up, and I really wish we could answer all your questions. But like I said at the beginning, this is for beginning conversations, not finishing them, and we're way over time.
Yeah.
So Greg, thank you very much.